her true story from hospice. They didn't visit me while I faded, so I left my savings to the nurse who held my hand. And when my daughter said, "She just lives on welfare, what is there to lose?" I finally answered without speaking. That was my daughter's voice, calm, cold, like she was talking about a stranger instead of the woman who once braided her hair before every first day of school. I sat in the corner of the living room, the afternoon light casting long, tired shadows on the carpet I had vacuumed for 20 years. My hands rested on my lap, still, folded the same hands that once held hers through every fever, every heartbreak, every scraped knee. Now those hands weren't even worth looking at. Across from me sat my son Mark, his wife with her arms crossed, legs bouncing in impatience. My daughter Elaine stood by the fireplace, phone in hand, half listening, half texting. Only my youngest, Peter, wasn't present. He lived out of state, and to be honest, that was probably for the best. He'd only be another voice nodding along. Before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Try to watch the videos as long as possible, by watching more often. YouTube will promote these stories to a larger audience, grow your channel, and bring you more interesting things. Let's start now. "Mom!" Elaine finally looked up. "The lawyer's coming at 4. It's just a signature of formality. We're just organizing things," Mark added, clearing his throat. "In case, anything happens. It's not like we're kicking you out." He insisted. "It's just logical, practical. The house is old. The stairs are dangerous. You've had 2 falls this year." His wife chimed in, "And the nursing facility has full-time care." "It's nice." "Really, I didn't say a word. They thought my silence was consent. It always had been." I had been silent when Elaine borrowed money and never paid it back. I had been silent when Mark missed 3 Mother's Days in a row. I had been silent when his wife called my decor dusty and told me my roast chicken tasted like the 1950s. I had been silent when they stopped calling, when the visits turned into obligations, when the laughter left the house but the judgment stayed. But I wasn't deaf, and I wasn't blind. I saw the way they looked at me like a task, a responsibility, a piece of old furniture that took up space but couldn't be thrown away. Elaine tapped her phone, sighed, and said it again. "She just lives on welfare. What is there to lose?" Mark nodded slowly, turning to me with a rehearsed softness. "Mom, you raised us to be smart. This is smart. This isn't about love. Okay, it's about logistics. Logistics. That's what I had become, a logistical burden." "Once the paperwork is done," his wife added, "we can have someone come pack up your things. You don't need to worry about the hassle. You just rest." If you've ever been treated like an afterthought in the home you helped build. Leave a 13, so we know we're not alone. They had no idea how long I had been resting in silence, waiting. I had spent my whole life holding this family together, like worn-out glue, their secrets, their tempers, their finances. I was the emergency contact, the babysitter, the overnight nurse, the last-minute check writer. Now, I was the old woman in the corner whose signature stood between them and a clean conscience. The lawyer arrived at exactly 4, a thin man with square glasses and a leather case. He shook my hand like I was still someone useful, still present. He laid the papers out on the table, 2 copies, notarized, itemized, formal. I glanced down and saw my name, not the one they called when they needed help. Not Mom, not Mama, just Margaret L. Hill, the old woman with a deed and no voice. This just clarifies intent. The lawyer explained gently. Power of attorney, distribution preferences, medical directives. Mark handed me a pen. It's all standard. Mom, we just want to do this now, before things get harder, Elaine added. You're not dying, but you're not getting younger either. I looked at the pen. I looked at their faces. I looked at the space between us once full of memories, now cold like a courtroom. Then I smiled. The same smile I gave them when I hid my broken wrist so they wouldn't worry. The same smile I wore when I wrapped gifts with money from a job they never knew I still had. The same smile I gave myself in the mirror when no one called on my birthday. I'll think about it, I said, sliding the papers back. Mark frowned. There's nothing to think about. Elaine's voice tightened. Mom, don't make this harder than it is. I stood up slowly, letting the silence settle like dust on an unused mantle. I've made everything easier for all of you your whole lives. I said, let me have this one moment. And I left the room. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. But in my chest, something stirred. Something that had been asleep for a long, long time. Not anger, not sadness. Something simpler. Resolve. Because for the first time, I realized what they really thought of me. And for the first time, I was going to show them how wrong they were. There's a strange kind of silence in early mornings just before the sun rises. That was always my favorite time, when the house was quiet and I could pretend, just for a few minutes, that the world still needed me. Most people don't know what it's like to start over at 36. With 3 children and a bank account so empty, it might as well have laughed in your face. But I do. I started over with nothing but my hands and my name, and I worked both to the bone. After my husband died, I didn't cry much. I couldn't afford to. Grief was a luxury for women who had time to break down. I had mouths to feed and rent to cover. I had a mortgage that didn't care I was a widow. I had a baby still in diapers and 2 more asking when Daddy was coming home. So I went to work. At first, it was cleaning houses. I scrubbed strangers' toilets while wearing rubber gloves too big for my hands. I smiled when they told me not to touch the crystal, even though I dusted my own wedding glasses with care just the night before. Then it was waiting tables on weekends, then folding shirts at the department store, then tutoring neighborhood kids and reading after dinner. I stitched hems, baked pies, cleaned gutters, mowed lawns, whatever would bring in an extra $5 or $10. We didn't have dinners. We had survival meals. Rice with canned vegetables, toast with margarine. Sometimes I told the kids I wasn't hungry so they could have seconds. I drank hot water and called it tea. They never asked why I didn't eat. They never asked where the new backpacks came from or how the light stayed on when I hadn't bought myself a coat in 6 winters. They just lived. And that's what I wanted. I wanted them to live without shame, without fear, without the weight of the struggle I carried every single day. But I carried it, every ounce of it. I remember one winter, the pipes froze in the kitchen. We had to boil water on the stove just to wash dishes. I soaked my hands in warm water until the skin peeled. That year, I caught the flu and kept working anyway. I couldn't afford to stop. I couldn't afford to be weak. And every time I got paid, no matter how little, I set something aside. $1 here, $5 there. Sometimes just coins. Eventually, I opened a secret account, one the kids didn't know about. I called it the emergency fund. But over time, it became something else. My silent proof. My invisible monument to endurance. Years passed. The money grew. I invested small, safe. A little mutual fund here, a savings bond there. I watched it grow like a stubborn tree in a backyard no one tended but me. By the time I turned 70, that fund had grown to over $900,000, all from scrubbing floors, ironing shirts, cleaning hotel rooms, managing grocery coupons, and skipping meals. All from saying no to myself over and over again so I could say yes to my children. And yet, they never asked. They never asked how I managed. Never asked if I had enough. Never noticed the same coat I wore for 15 years. Never asked about the second job I still kept, until my hips gave out. Mom's fine. That's what they always said. She doesn't need much. She's used to simple living. She's proud. She doesn't want help. I didn't want help. I wanted to matter. I wanted them to see me not just as the woman who gave birth to them, but as the woman who held them together when their world fell apart. Instead, they saw a duty, a burden wrapped in soft cardigans and homemade soup. I was invited to birthday parties, but never asked to stay the night. I was called to babysit, but never offered a ride home. I brought dishes to Thanksgiving and watched them sit untouched while they talked about the latest recipe from TikTok. They didn't mean to be cruel, but they didn't mean to be kind either. And that's what hurt most. It wasn't the forgetting. It was the never thinking in the first place. Never wondering if the woman who once fed them from her own plate might still be hungry in other ways, hungry for conversation, for recognition, for someone to say, "Mom, how are you really?" That question never came, but something else did. Clarity. I realized in those lonely afternoons at the hospice, after the nurses left and the light faded, that I had never been empty, not in the way they thought. They believed I had nothing. They were wrong. I had everything that mattered. Discipline, memory, and one last card to play. And I would, not out of vengeance, but out of justice, out of love for myself. Because if they wouldn't see my worth, someone else would. No one helped me pack. I folded my clothes one by one, placed them in the small rolling suitcase I'd bought 10 years earlier on sale at Target, and zipped it up slowly. There wasn't much to bring. A few nightgowns, my Bible, a faded photograph of the three of them when they still had milk teeth and jelly-stained cheeks. The car arrived at 9:00 a.m. on a Thursday. Just a town car with a driver who didn't make eye contact. I climbed in, dragging the suitcase by myself. No goodbye hugs, no see you laters, just silence. They'd said they were busy with work. Busy, like I hadn't worked my entire life. The hospice center was clean, quiet, too quiet, like a hotel for people who had run out of time. I smiled politely at the nurse who greeted me, signed the intake forms with shaking hands, and was wheeled to my room. Room 207, a twin bed, a small table, one window facing a parking lot. "This is temporary," I whispered to myself. Just a transition. But I knew better. Places like this don't have transitions. They have endings. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The sheets smelled like bleach, and the walls like resignation. I stared at the ceiling fan and listened to it creak like an old man's sigh. No one called. No one visited. The next day, I met Maria, She came in humming, a young woman, maybe late 20s, with warm brown skin and soft hands that moved like kindness. She wore pink scrubs and had a little flower pin on her back. "Hi, Mama," she said, with a smile so full of sun it nearly blinded me. I blinked. "Did you just call me Mama?" She nodded. "That okay? You remind me of my abuelita. She passed last year, but when I saw you, I don't know. Something about your eyes. Same sadness." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't been called anything that tender in years. Maria didn't wait for permission to care. She adjusted my pillow, helped me brush my thinning hair, asked if I liked hot tea or coffee in the morning. She brought a lavender-scented lotion and rubbed it on my hands gently, like I was made of paper and memory. That night she sat by my bed and told me about her hometown in Mexico, the mountains, the mango trees, the way her mother used to sing while stirring soup. I listened, really listened. It had been so long since anyone talked to me without rushing. On the third day, she brought in a little speaker and played old jazz songs I hadn't heard in decades. I tapped my foot weakly. She laughed, clapped. "You got rhythm, Mama?" And I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled without forcing it, but it wasn't all music and laughter. There were days when I didn't want to eat, days when I didn't speak at all. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, waiting for something, anything to make me feel like I still mattered. Maria never pushed. She just sat, sometimes in silence, sometimes telling stories, always present. One night, she asked softly, "Do you have family? Anyone coming to visit?" I turned my head to the window. The parking lot was empty. "No," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have anyone." She didn't say anything for a long time. I thought she hadn't heard me. But when I looked back, I saw tears running down her cheeks. She was crying for me, for the mother no one visited, for the woman left behind, for the life that had given so much and now sat quietly in a hospice room, waiting to be remembered. I reached for her hand. "I'm sorry," I said. She shook her head. "Don't be. You're not alone." Not anymore. She squeezed my hand like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. And in that moment, I believed her. Maria didn't come from my blood, but she carried my grief like it was her own. She treated my pain with reverence, not pity, and she gave me something my children had long forgotten how to give: presence. Every evening after that, she called me Mama. She brought me tea with honey and read to me from old books she borrowed from the library. She made me feel seen, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that's when I knew. If love isn't about blood, but about showing up, then Maria was my daughter in all the ways that mattered. She didn't walk me into that hospice room, but she was the first person who made it feel like home. It was a Thursday. I remember because Maria had brought me chamomile tea with a cinnamon stick, and I'd finally had the strength to sit up in bed without help. The sun was streaming through the window, warm and generous. Maria had just changed my sheets, fluffed my pillows, and laid a crocheted blanket across my legs. "I feel human today," I told her. She smiled, kissed me gently on the forehead, and said, "That's because you are, Mama. Beautiful, loved, and human." An hour later, the knock came. A nurse peeked into my room and said, "You've got visitors." I sat up straighter, heart stuttering in my chest. Visitors I hadn't had any since I'd arrived. Not one call, not one card. And now, visitors I tried not to hope. But hope, as always, betrayed me a little. Mark stepped in first. My son, 47 now, a little grayer, still carrying himself like the world owed him something. Behind him was his daughter. My granddaughter, Olivia. She was 17, tall and disinterested, eyes glued to her phone. "Hi, Mom," Mark said stiffly, like he was reciting a line. "We thought we'd drop by." I opened my mouth, overwhelmed, unsure if I could speak without crying. My hands trembled on the blanket. But before I could say anything, I heard Olivia lean toward her father and whisper, "Take a quick photo and caption it. Visiting Grandma for the last time, then we'll go for brunch." The words were soft, careless, but they hit like a hammer. My breath caught. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. "Let's take the photo quick. Caption it. Visiting Grandma one last time. Then we'll go get brunch." That was the plan. That was the entire point of their visit. A photo, a post, a plate of pancakes, grief, performance style. I couldn't move, couldn't look up. My hands, which had once buttoned Mark's school shirts and braided Olivia's baby hair, curled into fists under the blanket. They approached the bed. "Say cheese, Grandma," Olivia chirped, flipping her camera to selfie mode, positioning herself just close enough for the frame, but not for connection. Mark crouched beside her, hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I smiled, not for the camera, for the confirmation. Maria stood in the corner, frozen. She had witnessed it all, the truth, the betrayal. When they left 10 minutes later, without asking how I was, without staying for tea, without even a second glance. I turned to Maria. "Do you still have your phone?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Can you take a photo of them walking out just as they leave the building?" She didn't ask why. She just did it. Two figures, backs turned, walking to a car with coffee orders already in hand. One had posted the photo already. I saw it on her Instagram later. The caption read, "Said goodbye to Grandma today. Love you forever." She had added a crying emoji. I stared at that post for a long time. It got 143 likes. People commented things like, "You're so strong. Sending love. She must be so proud." Proud of what? Of a granddaughter who used my dying to get social clout. Of a son who showed up only when he thought there might be paperwork or a guilt-free brunch afterward. Maria sat beside me that night, holding my hand as I stared at the ceiling. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "No one deserves that." I blinked away the tears. I should have expected it, but that doesn't make it right. I turned to her, my throat raw with unsaid things. They didn't come for me. I said, they came for a photo, a story, something to post, something that makes them look like good people. Maria nodded. "But you are a good person, and you deserve better than a caption." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the printout of Olivia's post. Maria had helped me screenshot it and email it to herself, then printed it at the nurse's station. I tucked it into the drawer beside my bed, along with the photo Maria had taken of them leaving. Evidence not for court, for clarity, for memory, because someday they would say they had been there, that they cared, that they showed up, and I would have proof that they did. Just not for me. The room felt colder after that visit, like the sun had pulled back its warmth out of embarrassment. But Maria stayed. She brought me hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, sang softly in Spanish until my shoulders stopped shaking, and laid her hand over mine like an anchor. "I don't have brunch plans," she said, smiling sadly. "I've got nowhere better to be than here." And I believed her. She didn't take a photo. She took my pain and made room for it in her heart. I wasn't trying to listen in. Truly, I wasn't. Maria had left her tablet on the bedside table. I was reaching to turn off the soft jazz she'd been playing during lunch when I saw the screen light up. Family Zoom call. Mark. Elaine. Peter. My fingers froze above the screen. Mark. Elaine. Peter. All three of my children. Together. I hadn't seen them all in one place, virtual or real, in over a year. I should have looked away, should have turned it off, but something in me, an ache too deep to ignore, reached forward and tapped the screen, just enough to let their voices spill into the room like cold water. Elaine's face filled the frame first, framed by her modern kitchen and 2 floating shelves decorated with fake plants. She was already mid-sentence. "We just need to hold it together for another couple weeks. Max, she's not going to last much longer." "Don't say it like that," Peter muttered. Though his voice lacked conviction, Mark joined with a snort. "Come on, we're not monsters. We're being practical." Elaine laughed. "Right, like, let's just do what good children do. Post a few more throwbacks, send a flower basket, keep up appearances, then we can move on." I felt my body go still. Not tense, not angry, just still. A kind of stillness that comes when something you've long suspected is finally confirmed, when you stop hoping for the best and just accept what always was. Peter scratched his beard, glancing sideways as if checking to make sure no one overheard him. "Look, she probably doesn't even know what day it is anymore. Her nurse does most of the talking. What's her name?" Maria Elaine waved her hand. "The Mexican girl." "Yeah, she's sweet. Probably the one actually caring for her." Mark leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Well, she can keep doing that. As long as Mom signs the final version of the will. We're fine. She doesn't need to worry about anything else. We'll handle the rest." Elaine leaned closer to the camera. "Just keep the narrative clean. Okay, none of us want to be the kid who dumped Mom in hospice. Let the neighbors think we're being dutiful." "Right," Mark chuckled. "Let's not tank our reputations over this." "A few more weeks of pretending won't kill us." I clicked the screen off. Silence returned to the room like an old friend. I lay back on my pillow, staring at the ceiling, the words still ringing in my ears. Let the neighbors think we're being dutiful. A few more weeks of pretending. She's not going to last much longer. They weren't grieving. They were managing, curating their image, coordinating performance, practicing controlled compassion for an audience that didn't exist. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a PR liability. I laughed, a small, dry laugh that barely lifted my chest. But it was real. Not bitter, not wounded, just confirmation. I had always known, somewhere in the quiet parts of myself, that their love had strings, that my value had expiration dates, that I was most appreciated when I was giving money, time, praise, and least noticed when I needed, still, It was something else to hear it spoken aloud. Pretend to care, keep up appearances, probably doesn't know what day it is. I knew what day it was. It was the day I stopped pretending they would ever change. Maria walked in moments later, holding a tray of tea and shortbread cookies. She saw the look on my face, and her smile faltered. "Everything okay?" "Mama." I turned to her, eyes clear. "Yes, sweetheart, everything is finally clear." She set the tray down and sat beside me, taking my hand. I heard them. I whispered. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. Her face crumpled. "Oh, no." I shook my head. "Don't apologize. I'm glad I did. Now I know what I'm dealing with. No illusions." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of truth pressing gently against the walls. "They think I'm dying," I said finally. Maria squeezed my hand. "You're not." "No," I agreed, a quiet fire lighting in my chest. "I'm not." I turned my head to look at her, and even if I were, I'd still have time, enough to make one final decision. Her brow furrowed. "What kind of decision?" I smiled again. This time not with sadness, but with clarity. The kind that changes everything. The next morning, I asked Maria for a favor. "Could you help me find a number?" I asked. She smiled. "Of course. Mama." I gave her the name of my old lawyer, Henry Ellison. A kind man with soft eyes and a sharp mind. He'd helped me years ago when I opened that secret account quietly, discreetly, without judgment. He was the only person besides me who knew the value of the life I had built behind closed doors. Maria dialed for me, placed the tablet on my lap, and excused herself to give me privacy. "Mrs. Hill." Henry's voice crackled through the speaker. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." "I'm ready," I said. "For what?" "To make it official." 2 days later, Henry arrived at the hospice. He looked older, more stooped, but still sharp as ever. He brought paperwork, a notary, and eyes that didn't flinch when I said what I wanted. "I want to revise my will." I told him everything, my savings, my investments, and especially the apartment I just bought in Lakeside Hills. "I want them transferred to Maria Reyes." He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "Also," I added, "I want to initiate legal adoption. I want her to be my daughter, officially." There was a pause, not from shock, but from awe. Henry adjusted his glasses. "You understand what this means." "Margaret." "I do," I said, "better than anyone." Over the next week, I signed forms, answered calls, and whispered intentions that had taken decades to form. I watched as the transfer of assets began. The stock portfolio I had quietly grown, modest but solid, now bore Maria's name. The hidden savings account, built penny by penny, was redirected, and the apartment, a one-bedroom place with a view of the lake, just 15 minutes from the hospice, was finalized. I found it last year. I told Maria, handing her the keys with trembling fingers. I wasn't sure who it was for. I just knew someone would need it. "Turns out it was you." Maria looked at the keys like they were too heavy to hold. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "Yes," I said gently. "You can, because you didn't ask for it, because you earned it." She tried to protest, but I shook my head. You gave me more in 2 weeks than my own children did in 20 years. You saw me, not the obligation, not the inheritance, not the hospital bed, me. She knelt beside me, tears streaking her cheeks. I just loved you. Mama, that's all. And that, I said, placing a hand on her head, is everything. That evening, after the final paper was signed, Henry leaned in and said, No one's going to take this well. I'm not doing it for well, I replied. I'm doing it for right. He nodded slowly. She's lucky to have you. I smiled. No, Henry. I'm lucky to have her. The official adoption came through 2 weeks later. Maria stood in the hospice hallway, holding the papers and shaking hands. Daughter of record, Maria Isabella Reyes. She wept as she read it out loud. Not from greed, from grace. We had no balloons, no cake, no announcements, just 2 women, one who had been discarded and one who had stayed. Now bound, not by blood, but by choice. That night, I told her, You're not a replacement. You're a reward. For all the years I thought love had left me. She curled beside me on the hospice bed, like a child again, her arms wrapped around mine. They won't understand, she whispered. No, I said, but one day they'll know, and that will have to be enough. The lake apartment sat quiet and untouched for now, but I knew she would fill it with life. Flowers in the window, books on the shelves, laughter in the kitchen, maybe even a framed photo of the 2 of us by the bedside. My children would wonder where everything went. They would call lawyers. They would search bank accounts. They would find nothing, and eventually, they would find her, and they would realize the fortune they assumed never existed had found a home in the hands of someone who never expected anything at all. After the papers were signed and the calls stopped coming, Maria moved in. Not officially, not with boxes and bags, but with her presence. She started staying longer shifts, bringing her meals, sleeping in the recliner by my bed, wrapped in a quilt her grandmother had sewn. The other nurses smiled and said nothing. They understood. We made a little life for ourselves inside room 207. In the mornings, she brewed coffee and brought me a cup laced with cinnamon and cream. We'd sip in silence while the sun warmed the window pane, watching the birds perch on the feeder outside. She named them Gertrude, Harold, Thelma, and I pretended not to remember their names the next day just so she'd tell me again. At noon, we cooked. The hospice allowed small comforts for residents nearing the end, and with the help of a kind-hearted kitchen aide, Maria and I turned a corner of the break room into our own little kitchen. I taught her my mother's biscuit recipe, cold butter, never melted, and fold the dough like you're tucking in a baby. She got flour everywhere, every time, and laughed like a child. In the afternoons, we read. Sometimes I chose. Sometimes she did. She liked poetry, Neruda and Angelou. I liked old stories, Steinbeck, Austen, the Brontes. We'd trade paragraphs, voices overlapping, stopping only to sip tea or comment on a particularly beautiful sentence. We planted herbs in small pots by the window, basil, mint, and lavender. She made labels with little smiley faces. Every week, she brought a new plant to join the group. She called them our girls. They're just like us, she'd say, patting the soil gently. Small, quiet, but growing strong. My children never visited again. Not after the documents went through. Not after Henry sent the final legal notices. Not even a phone call to ask how I was doing. The silence they left behind was deep, but not painful. Because I no longer waited. I no longer checked the clock on Sundays or held my breath on holidays. I no longer hoped for footsteps in the hallway or voices outside my door. That ache was gone. In its place, peace. Maria became my daughter in every way that mattered. She brushed my hair and braided it like I used to braid Elaine's. She painted my nails a soft lilac and called it my queen color. She memorized my favorite songs and hummed them while tidying up. She even learned how to knit, badly, just so I could have someone to critique with love. And I began to write again. Not letters. There was no one left to write to, but journals, stories from my past, lessons from a life built on sacrifice, moments I never told anyone. I wrote them for her. Each entry started with, "To my daughter Maria." I told her about my mother, who used to cry over bread dough when she thought no one was watching, about the man I almost married before I met their father, about the first time I realized silence could be power. I told her everything. She kept the journals in a wooden box by her recliner, said she would read them out loud to her own children one day. If she ever had any. "They'll know about you," she whispered, "and they'll know how to love right." One evening, while the sky turned gold and the hospice halls grew quiet, I told her something I'd carried for decades when I was little. I said, I thought love had to come from blood, that only mothers and fathers and siblings could give it to you, and if they didn't, then you'd never get it. She held my hand. "But that's not true," I said. "Love isn't in the blood. It's in the showing up, in the staying." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "Then I'll stay." "You already have," I said, squeezing her hand, longer and kinder than anyone else ever did. That night, we made cinnamon rolls, burned half, laughed at all of them. That night, I told her where I kept the last letter I ever wrote to my children. Not out of spite, but out of truth. That night, I knew something in me had been healed, not fixed, not erased, but honored. Because in the end, what I had wasn't what I lost. It was what I found, a daughter, not by blood, but by heart, a home, not of walls, but of trust, and a peace, not from forgetting, but from finally being remembered. It took less than a week for the calls to start. Elaine called first, her voice tight, like someone trying to stay polite while flames rose beneath her. Mom laughed. Nothing Mark followed, angry, disbelieving. There must be a mistake. There's no way she just gave it all away. What about the house, the stocks, the savings, and Peter, always the softest? Simply asked why they didn't call me. They called Henry, and Henry, bless him, followed my instructions to the letter. Each of them received a package in the mail. Same brown box, same weightless silence inside. No legal documents, no check, no instructions. Just one photograph. The one Maria took of them leaving the hospice, backs turned, faces unreadable, and one note, neatly folded. My children came to hospice, but their humanity stayed outside the door. That was all. No anger, no apology, just the truth. I don't know how they reacted. I didn't ask Henry, and he didn't offer. Some things are better left unspoken. Because by then, Maria and I were gone. Not gone, just somewhere better. We moved into the apartment by the lake, the one I bought when I still hoped someone would remember my favorite color or ask me what kind of music I liked. Maria decorated the windows with lace curtains. She planted marigolds and lavender on the balcony. She filled the fridge with fresh mangoes and tortillas. She framed one of my old journal pages and hung it above the kitchen sink. It read, "Love doesn't ask where you came from. It asks, can I stay?" We lived simply, sweetly, like mother and daughter who had nothing to prove and everything to savor. We had routines: morning coffee on the balcony, midday puzzles, evening walks. Some nights we cooked. Some nights we ordered takeout and watched old movies. She cried at Steel Magnolias. I cried at Field of Dreams. We laughed at both. She called me mama with the kind of ease that only comes from choosing someone again and again, and I called her mine. Not my nurse, not my caretaker, my daughter. One night, we stood at the window watching rain streak down the glass. She said, "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I said, "They don't have to. Don't you want them to?" I paused, then smiled softly. I wanted them to show up, and they didn't. That's all I needed to know. She rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry." I kissed her hair. "Don't be. You're here. That's what matters." And it was, because healing doesn't always come from the ones who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from the stranger who stays. The hand that holds, the heart that opens, even when it doesn't have to. That's what Maria was. Not a miracle, not a replacement, a return of dignity, of warmth, of love that asked for nothing but room to exist. And in that quiet apartment by the lake, surrounded by light and lavender, I found what I'd been denied for so long. Not justice, peace, not retribution, recognition, not a family of blood, but a family nonetheless. If you've ever been treated like a burden, if you've ever sat in silence while they spoke over you, if you've ever been forgotten by those you gave everything to, then this story is for you. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of your strongest choice. Because when we stop waiting for them to remember us, we begin to remember ourselves. And sometimes, the family we choose is stronger than the one we were born into. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where the forgotten are finally heard and the quiet finally speak. Because when a grandma tells her story, the world finally listens.